This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm the host, Andy Steele, and tonight we're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm going to be going over the latest news. I haven't had a chance to really go over it in the past couple of episodes that we've had, and I don't have a guest tonight. It's just going to be me. And we're going to be talking about, later on, if I don't get into too much of a tangent with the news, personal lives. What waking up to the truth of 9/11, the building demolitions in New York, the fact that buildings 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center complex were brought down with explosives on 9/11, what that does to the individual, how that affects your life, and how to deal with it. All right, I mean, there's so many things that this touches upon in our personal lives as we take up this fight, as we become aware of the reality of 9/11. You know, what do you do about depression? What do you do about relationships, dating? You know, those kinds of things. You know, because this stuff is going to come up, obviously, especially if you're active with it. And I don't think we've had a chance to really go over that on this show. I've tried to in different times, different interviews, but the interviews have just never taken that direction. And I got an email earlier in the week, or maybe last week, requesting that I do a show like this. So here it is. We're going to be doing the show, and I'm going to be giving my own little self-help seminar for all of you out there in the 9/11 truth world. So stay tuned for that. We're going to go over the news first. Before we do go over the news, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that beginning now. And that is 10 seconds. Now, a couple of weeks ago, during the episode in which I interviewed Stephen Dusterwald, I opened the show talking about current events, specifically the revelations that Brian Williams has been lying about certain things in his past and in his career to try to make himself sound exciting, make his career sound like more things have happened in it, try to make himself sound like an action hero to a certain extent. And it's sad, it's a little pathetic, but people do this, and it's very common. It kind of reminds me of that movie Unforgiven, and if you've never seen that, it's a pretty good movie. It's a Western. Clint Eastwood is the star of it, but there's a character in it called English Bob, and I don't remember who plays him, but he's a English gentleman who comes to America. He's writing a book, or no, actually, there's a biographer following him around, and English Bob is telling all of these stories, and Gene Hackman plays the sheriff, and I don't remember how English Bob and Gene Hackman's character run into each other, but they had known each other before, and Gene Hackman essentially beats the snot out of him, and he's telling the biographer the truth of English Bob's career and how a lot of it's exaggerated and some of it didn't even happen, and English Bob is left beaten up and shamed as a result. So that's what a lot of these people remind me of, and if you remember, if you see this movie, that character was very arrogant, very condescending type of person, saying things about America, saying things about the people around him. He's not a very sympathetic character in there. And I kind of look at these mainstream corporate media people as not very sympathetic characters either. I mean, they're humans. I wouldn't want to see anything happen to them. It is good to see the truth coming out about them because it gives a reflection to the public of who these people really are and the feet of clay on which they stand. So we talked about that. We focused on the lies that NBC has told in the years of false reporting on certain events, distorting facts. And I made the point that we were focusing on NBC News, but common sense should tell you that if there's a problem at NBC, there's probably problems in other places. It's probably something that a lot of people in that same profession and that same market are doing. Well, now we've got this coming out. I got an article here from Politico titled CNN Publishes O'Reilly Tape. Now, Bill O'Reilly has not exactly been very nice to the 9/11 Truth Movement over the years. I played this in an early episode when Bernie Suarez was hosting this program with me, clips where Bill O'Reilly was trying to make signing a 9/11 Truth petition sound like it was a potential criminal activity. And I think that's done by design to try to put that thought in people's heads. You know, without saying that it's a crime, if you talk about it like it is, people get that impression, you know. So here we go with this story. This is by Hottest Gold. It said, CNN has published a recording of Fox News host Bill O'Reilly from the 1970s that indicates he was not present outside the Florida house where an associate of Lee Harvey Oswald committed suicide. In the taped telephone conversation conducted in March of 1977 between O'Reilly, then a correspondent with Dallas television station WFAA-TV, and Gayton Fonzie, an investigator on the House Select Committee of Assassinations, O'Reilly can be heard telling Fonzie he's planning to travel to Florida to investigate the suicide of George de Mohrenschildt, an associate of Oswald's who had killed himself that day. In the conversation provided to CNN by Fonzie's widow, Fonzie tells O'Reilly about the suicide. O'Reilly in turn replies he'll travel to Florida the next day. This is why this is important right here. In his book, Killing Kennedy, and on Fox News, O'Reilly has claimed that he was standing on the porch of de Mohrenschildt's daughter's house in Florida when he heard a gunshot sound, which he said was the sound of de Mohrenschildt killing himself. Former colleagues of O'Reilly's have also come forward saying O'Reilly was not in Florida at the time of the suicide. And I guess there's some controversy around this de Mohrenschildt's death, too. People have questioned. I'm not going to get into that on this show. I'm not as literate on the JFK thing as I am with 9/11. However, this is just another example, all right, of the kind of people that we listen to on the television sets, or that we used to listen to. I think a lot more people are getting the common sense now to turn it off. Some people aren't, though, so they need to hear stories like this, because if they're embellishing on something like this, what else are they embellishing on? Maybe it also suits their career to cover up certain facts that should be the story of the century. Now, in this case, this isn't just getting a memory wrong, or perhaps, thinking that you were talking to one person at a certain time, but you actually talked to somebody else, just because I understand memory gets screwed up over time. And as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to remember something that happened 20 years ago. However, if you're standing on the porch of somebody's house and you hear a gunshot and that person killed themselves, that's not something that you're going to get wrong. That's not something that you're going to get mixed up with some other memory. That's a very distinctive thing that will stand out in your mind. And especially if it didn't happen to you, you're not going to have a false memory of something like that. All right? The fact that Bill O'Reilly wrote that he was standing on this person's porch when he killed himself, and that he actually wasn't, shows that Bill O'Reilly consciously made a decision to lie. Or whoever edited his book made that decision to change the facts, but the buck still stops with Bill O'Reilly because he's the author. I don't know. And I don't know how Bill O'Reilly is going to defend himself. This is relevant to 9/11 for the point that I just made a few moments ago. All right? Obviously, somewhere along the line, either someone behind Bill O'Reilly or Bill O'Reilly himself made this decision that lying would be the best way to boost the book, which in turn boosts Bill O'Reilly's career. Now, with 9/11, mainstream journalists aren't necessarily going to have their career boosted by talking about the truth of 9/11, the fact that pre-placed explosives brought down the towers in Building 7. So in that case, if they're willing to compromise integrity with the book and this false story about hearing the gunshot as de Mohrenschildt killed himself for Bill O'Reilly's career, then it stands to reason that he's willing to compromise his integrity when it comes to important issues like 9/11 too, when in that case it's better to just stay silent and demonize anybody who talks about this evidence. All right, when you cut away all of this commentary that I'm offering you, really what I'm trying to put in your brain here and demonstrate is that Bill O'Reilly is a liar. He's proven himself to be a liar. And so why should you trust anything that he has to say about 9/11? And so now here's an example of a person from Fox News lying. And people who are on the left are not going to find anything all that revealing about that statement. I mean, this has kind of come to be expected from Fox News, but this shows that this is endemic throughout the entire corporate media establishment. And I think we're going to get to the truth. We're going to get a better understanding of how the corporate media works now as it tears itself apart, as these petty differences between the networks and their ideologies makes them out each other. So I can't wait to see more of this and see how Fox News is going to retaliate when all of this blows over and Bill O'Reilly faces the consequences for his own embellishments. We also have another story. This one is from RT, and this actually happened a couple of weeks ago. It says, a massive blaze has engulfed the Marina Torch skyscraper in Dubai, forcing hundreds of people to flee the 336-meter high tower, one of the tallest residential buildings in the world. It took firefighters over 2 hours to bring the fire under control. The fire initially started in the middle of the tower, rapidly spreading across some 15 floors, intensifying and reigniting with each gust of wind, according to photos and videos from the scene. If you watch this thing, this demonstrates what a high-rise fire should look like. Building 7 was not hit by an airplane. It was a high-rise fire. It fell in 7 seconds. A 47-story steel frame high-rise falling 7 seconds. 105 feet of free fall. That did not happen with Dubai because these steel frame high-rises do not fall unless you have pre-placed explosives in them. They light up like a torch in the night. Parts of the building fall off over time. And that's how it's done. That's why they build steel frame high-rises, to keep them up, to keep them standing, to keep them intact for events like this, like fires. So here we go again. We've got another example of how the official story doesn't match up with reality, and real life is showing us what we should have seen on the day of 9/11. Just as we've seen in these different cases with the tower in China, with the tower in Spain, and throughout time, these things are going to keep on happening. So you can check that out. I'm going to link that up at 911freefall.com. We also got this article from Kevin Ryan. The title of the article is How Science Died at the World Trade Center. And I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's a long article, but I'm just going to read a part of it, or the beginning. It begins, science has been misused for political purposes many times in history. However, the most glaring example of politically motivated pseudo-science, that employed by the U.S. government scientists to explain the destruction of the World Trade Center, continues to be ignored by many scientists. As we pass the 10th anniversary of the introduction of that account, it is useful to review historic examples of fake science used for political purposes and the pattern that defines that abuse. An early example of pseudoscience used to promote a political agenda was a concerted Soviet effort to contradict evolutionary theory and Mendelian inheritance. For nearly 45 years, the Soviet government used propaganda to foster unproven theories of agriculture promoted by its Minister of Agriculture, Trofim Lysenko. Scientists seeking favor with the Soviet hierarchy produced fake experimental data in support of Lysenko's false claims. Scientific evidence from the fields of biology and genetics was banned in favor of educational programs that taught only Lysenkoism, and many biologists and geneticists were executed or sent to labor camps. This propaganda-fueled program of anti-science continued for over 40 years until 1964 and spread to other countries, including China. In the 2010 book Merchants of Doubt, authors Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway describe several other examples of the misuse of science spanning from the 1950s to the present. They show how widely respected scientists participated in clearly non-scientific efforts to promote the agendas of big business and big government. Examples include the tobacco industry's misuse of science to obfuscate the links between smoking and cancer, the military-industrial complex's use of scientists to support the scientifically indefensible Strategic Defense Initiative, and several abuses of environmental science. As Oreskes and Conway made clear, science is about evidence. It is about claims that can be and have been tested through scientific research, experiment, experience, and observation, research that is then subject to critical review by a jury of scientific peers. In science, if experiments performed do not support a hypothesis, that hypothesis must be rejected. If conclusions fail to pass peer review due to a lack of supportive evidence or the discovery of evidence that directly contradicts them, those conclusions must be rejected. From Lysenkoism through the examples given by Oreskes and Conway, politically motivated pseudoscience demonstrates a pattern of characteristics as follows. Number 1, there is a lack of experiments. Number 2, the results of experiments are ignored or contradicted in the conclusions. Number 3, there is either no peer review or peer reviewer concerns are ignored. Number 4, the findings cannot be replicated or falsified due to the withholding of data. Number 5, false conclusions are supported by marketing or media propaganda. Number 6, hypotheses that are supported by the evidence are ignored. All 6 of these characteristics of pseudoscience are exhibited by the U.S. government investigation into what happened at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. That investigation was conducted by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and it had much in common with the examples given by Oreskes and Conway. So this article is up at 9/11 Blogger. You can read the whole thing. But this just goes to show you, this is another mapping out of what we've seen here in the post-9/11 world. All of those points I just read, all of those 6 points you can apply to 9/11. We talk about it all the time. I mean, withholding data, the fact that NIST won't even have its data looked at and reviewed by the scientific community. It's absolutely ridiculous. And as Jeremy Sagan said last week, you know, if they won't release this information because they're afraid that people will make their own models and find out that NIST models don't make any sense, that they're false. So we got a problem here. We can see this. All right, there's the reason we got to keep on talking about this issue. It's the reason the show exists, to just focus in on this, to not lose our focus in this mirror maze of news and every new thing that happens. And I'm not criticizing people that focus on current events and staying on top of what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in this world. I'm not in a bubble here. But we got to keep on hitting at the core. That's what this show is all about. I think of all of us in the alternative news movement like one of those old comic book panels, you know, when all of the heroes of a particular company's universe are up against some giant monster type of creature or villain, you know, like Galactus in Marvel Comics, and he's all huge and they're all small, but they're all punching at him in different places and just trying to bring this giant monster down. That's what I think of us in the alternative news movement as being. And this particular movement here with AE 9/11 Truth, our organization is focusing on one part, which I consider to be the most critical part. All right, it's the very heart with which the post 9/11 world beats. And again, you saw this on C-SPAN when we would ask people specific questions, targeted questions, ask the congressmen and newspaper writers specific scientific questions about Building 7, common sense questions that they couldn't refute, and how they would avoid it, how they had to dodge it. And then after a while, they knew they had to start addressing it in some way. C-SPAN knew they had to address it in some way, and saw Richard Gage on the program on August 1st. You know, knowing your facts. You know, they say knowledge is power, and I didn't like saying that at one point because it just sounded like some kind of cliche thing that teachers would say to make you stay in school, or, you know, they would put out public service announcements, kind of condescending, trying to tell you to enjoy going to school and go to college and get in debt, essentially. But that actually is true. Not in the sense that you need to have some fancy degree by your name to be smart. I don't believe that. I kind of look at a degree as a receipt, saying that you've paid into the system, you're now in debt, and you've got to pay that loan back, and you're no longer a threat to anyone. But actually knowing what you're talking about. I mean, you really can't argue with the truth. The truth is what it is. And you've seen what it does. You've seen how it can shake the pillars of the most powerful establishments. They run from us. You know, you talk to the heads of shows that have attacked AE 9/11 Truth, and they don't even want to give us a chance to defend ourselves because they know that if given the opportunity to present our case without any selective edits, that the people will hear people like Richard Gage or Stephen Jones and realize that they make sense, that they're reasonable. So the best thing that corporate media can do is not answer phone calls, not respond. I mean, notice this. Most times when they attack, like organizations like AE 9/11 Truth, they won't have a representative from AE 9/11 Truth on the show to defend themselves. You saw this with Jake Tapper when he got his dander up and got upset about the pamphlets that AE 9/11 Truth was handing out around the 9/11 memorial. Instead, they invite a lady from, I think it was Slate Magazine, on the program. What the heck does a lady from Slate Magazine have to do with AE 9/11 Truth? All right, if you want to go to the source and ask the horse, then go to the source. All right, bring Richard Gage on, have him explain. But they won't do that. They're afraid. They don't want to. They don't want to lose control of the reality they're crafting for you. So right there, you should see it. It's the false propaganda that Kevin Ryan talks about in this article, and it is scary. I mean, the good thing is we still have the heart of America inside of us. We still have the blood of those ancestors that made this country great at one time inside of us. So I don't think whatever agenda was being sought by bringing down those buildings and lying to us about 9/11, I don't think it's working out for the real perpetrators as well as they thought it would. All right, because we still have that spirit, we still have that heart. They can't control what's in our heart. And we're going to keep on fighting. You know, we're going to keep on spotlighting this issue and reminding them. Sort of like a wife in a bad marriage. You've seen that kind of stereotypical portrayal in movies where you've got some jerky husband and the wife is sitting in the corner drinking champagne and sort of undermining him with little snotty comments that are true about him. That's kind of what we are. That's what we do on this show. That's what the alternative news movement does. We remind everybody that this U.S. government, you're not a real man. All right, you're not what you pretend to be. And if that's our purpose, that's our purpose. Because we're waking people up all the time, and we're waking up the future. I mean, young people coming up. They're coming across this information about 9/11 and learning about physics and common sense, and they're becoming vigilant against the system that tries to enslave them the minute they enter adulthood, even before that, you know. And when I throw those terms around, enslavement, I mean, I consider being forced to regurgitate propaganda and the official story of 9/11, I consider that a form of enslavement. Not much different than the people who were forced to cry when Kim Jong-il died and pretend that they cared about this dictator. So, there you go. Read that article. It's by Kevin Ryan at 9/11 Blogger, like I said. All right, so anyway, earlier in the week I got an email from a listener of the show. And this person asked me if I would bring somebody on that would talk about these issues that come from 9/11, like I said at the beginning of the show. You know, waking up to the fact that your government is lying to you, that it was a controlled demolition, and all the ramifications of that. It's kind of a bummer. I understand that. I've been at this since about 2006. That's what I consider roughly my awakening time. I didn't realize that I would be so into this here 9 or 10 years later. So I didn't mark down the occasion or the day, so I can't remember an exact moment. But I've been at this long enough to have dealt with these things and to be able to talk about them, just in terms of having the confidence to be able to offer advice to people. But you know what bothers me about self-help people, and why I don't usually listen to too many of them on the internet or writing books, is that people automatically assume that the person giving the advice, and these people, a lot of them portray themselves as this, as having all the answers, saying that they've essentially reached that pinnacle and they've got the solution. I don't think anybody's got the solution. And a lot of times this kind of self-help stuff gets mixed in with this new agey stuff, and I'm not criticizing people that are into that. There's a lot of great people out there that talk about the spiritual existence and what the meaning of life is according to them. That's all good. That's all well and good. I'm just not that guy. I've listened to some of that stuff. I think it's very interesting, but at the end of the day, I have no idea. I have no idea what happens after we die. I have no idea what the meaning of life is. I'm just a regular guy trying to do his best, and I've decided that I am going to pursue this issue, and I'm just going to keep on talking about it and throw a rock at Godzilla and see if he falls down. Just every day, throw whatever rocks I can. And I think that's kind of the miracle of communication and the internet, too, because internet is a medium with which people can reach each other, is that you can find like-minded people. I think people take advice from other people if they feel that that other person is similar to them in some way. That person is essentially maybe like 80% them. There's somebody out there who may hear things that I say that feel that I have a lot in common with them just in the way I think, the way I outline the issues. So they may, want to know what I think about something like this. And see, if I have one more piece of the puzzle that they don't. So that might prompt them to listen. There are other people who may be turned off by the way that I present this information and conduct this show. They're not going to care what I think about life issues or the problems that come up in life whatsoever. They're going to go and listen to somebody else. That's fine. Because, again, I want people to go to wherever they think they need to go in order to make themselves better and deal with whatever problems that they are having. So, essentially, I'm just reaching out to the people that want to hear me, who think that they have something to gain from my experience and what I have to offer. And I'm very careful because I don't want to portray like I'm some expert. I have no psychology degree, and I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to be ever put on a pedestal because I don't want to have to deal with worrying about falling off of it. So with all of that said, I'm going to just go over what I think the best way to try to deal with knowing the truth of 9/11 and the controlled demolition evidence is, and getting through life and still enjoying life. Because that's really important too. You don't want to make yourself another victim of 9/11. So I believe that depression exists because programmed in you to let you know that something is going wrong in your life. It can be a result of something that you're doing wrong personally in your life, something that's toxic, some behavior, some way of thinking, or it can be something that others are doing to you. I mean, if you're around a lot of negative people, whining and complaining about life, that can affect your mood as well, because there's no outlet from it. And so, that's your body telling you that you need to deal with it in some way. All right, it's shutting down. It's breaking itself off from the world because there's something in your interaction with the world, whether it's the world yourself or something you're doing in that connection with the world. There's a bad connection with the outer world. So again, you can basically define depression as a bad connection with the outer world. I think that's the way to look at it. So to cure it, you got to deal with the root problem, not the symptoms. And see, this is the problem I have with these self-help web pages and books, because a lot of them just deal with the symptoms. I mean, for instance, if you go to Google and you type in dealing with depression, you get this list that pops up in the search that says, ways to challenge negative thinking. Think outside yourself. Ask yourself if you'd say what you're thinking about yourself to someone else. Well, if you're depressed enough, you might. I mean, if you reach that point where you really just don't care, you might be a total jerk to everybody else and have no problem doing it. So, where does that leave you? Allow yourself to be less than perfect. Well, I mean, some people who may be depressed may not be depressed because they're a perfectionist. They may be depressed because they're in a bad marriage and their husband's abusive, and this allowing yourself to be less than perfect has nothing to do with it. Socialize with positive people. And that can be very difficult to do if you're in a bad situation. I mean, think about somebody that was in a concentration camp. How are they going to socialize with positive people? I mean, that's a pretty extreme example I'm using, but it's hard to stay positive if you're in a really bad situation. What if you're in a situation where you have relatives and you're taking care of them and they're dying of cancer? You know, they're going to be sad. Obviously, you're going to be sad too. It's very difficult. And then it says keep a negative thought log, and I guess that's a novel idea, but most people don't do those kinds of things. And if you're depressed, you don't feel like doing much activity anyway. Why would you start doing this? These are helpful suggestions, but they don't really deal with the problem. I think if you got a depression, you got to actually deal with what's causing it. Figure out what is really bothering you. Now we're going to relate this to 9/11 truth. And I tried to think of factors from 9/11 truth that might lead to depression for certain people and thought about how do you deal with it? What makes people sad from waking up to the fact that the buildings in New York were brought down in a controlled demolition? And it sounds like a funny question. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer. But it's kind of tough because you got to analyze it. You got to think about this. And when I was trying to analyze it and preparing for this show, I came to this revelation. Even though it's a depressing topic and it has caused problems for people, it's caused strife in relationships, there's no reason that waking up to this, you know, the fact that it was a controlled demolition, should depress you if you don't let it. And I got to watch how I say this, and I got to make sure that I articulate this correctly, because that just sounds like I'm saying don't worry about it, you know, let it go. You know, be happy, be positive, don't think about these things. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's a way of dealing with this in such a manner that you can have a normal life and enjoy your life while fighting this cause. You know, what's one of the first issues? Mental isolation. All right, you feel like you're the only person who knows and or cares about this issue in your general area, you know, in your family, in your workplace, in your community. You may talk about this and people may look at you like you're a funny picture on the wall. Kind of depressing, right? Certainly doesn't make you feel good. It's kind of like one of those old Twilight Zone episodes where you're the only sane person and everybody else in the world is insane. So what do you do about that? It does sound kind of depressing the way I put it there. But what I found from doing this for a decade, close to a decade, is that you're really not alone. And in this age of social media, there's really no reason you can't meet other like-minded people and chat it up with them. I mean, that's, again, the miracle of communication, the miracle of the internet. There are tons of people out there who are awake to this. Tons of people out there talking about it. I remember when I first started this, I really thought I was going to be a lonely voice in the wilderness. I didn't even see other people doing this. I mean, there were web pages talking about 9/11 Truth, and there were YouTube videos and that. So I came up with this idea. I'm just going to create a MySpace page. Somebody had told me about MySpace, and I should get on it. So I created a personal one at first, and then I created another one. And I had no personal information on it. I essentially jammed it up with a ton of YouTube videos. And I said, I'm going to randomly add people. And they're going to wonder what my page is about and see it and click on the YouTube videos and watch them. And they're instantly going to wake up to 9/11 Truth. That was my idea. So I just sat there for an entire weekend adding people. Boom, 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 boom. Randomly, just wherever they came up. Pick a random zip code. Do it, you know. And I built it up, you know, a few thousand people. And some people would write to me and I'd write back to them. But what I found, and just through all of my wanderings, I found other people who had the same exact idea. I was really happy about that. I think there's something miraculous when a bunch of strangers from all over the world have the same idea. And through knowing them, you saw on their friends list there were other people like them. I came to find out there were tons of people. There was an entire online community doing this. And that's how we made these connections. That's how a lot of great things happened through MySpace before it was sold and taken over and destroyed. All right, so there's really no reason to feel isolated. Even if your people in your physical vicinity are asleep to this or don't want to hear this or make fun of you or whatever. I mean, there's more people out there online to talk to. And those are the people you want to talk to anyway, you know. But as well, I think that this feeling that we have that we're all alone is something that is perpetuated by the media. And I don't really think we're as alone as we think we are. There are a lot of open-minded people out there. People who are willing to listen to this. People who, when you get talking to them about the facts, are willing to consider this. People who are not married to a particular ideology or to the religion that we've made out of nationalism in this country. And you may bring up the idea to them, and they may immediately dismiss it. But when you start getting into the facts, they'll be awakened, just like I was. I mean, I've told this story before. I had somebody send me an email a few days after 9/11 saying it was a controlled demolition, and I just completely, I didn't get offended. I just kind of thought, oh wow, this stuff's starting quick, conspiracy theory stuff. I wasn't a jerk about it. But someone might look at my initial reaction and think that I was completely, I was a sheeple and that I'm never going to be reached. And just write me off as some terrible part of the great dumb rabble of America and use that as a justification for disliking me forever. But I did wake up eventually. Obviously, here I am doing this show. So just because people have an immediate reaction to something doesn't mean they're not open to the information. You just got to present the information. You got to present it in a nice way. You got to look at yourself, too. When you talk to other people, how are you presenting yourself? And you got to ask this question. Is it 9/11 truth, or is it something that you yourself are doing? I've had to ask this question to myself many times. Is somebody's reaction to me talking about this the result of the information and the fact that they're sheeple, quote unquote? I don't like that term, but the fact that they just don't want to hear it, that they're so patriotic and part of the religious nationalism that was created after 9/11? Or is it because maybe I'm rapid fire throwing it out at them the first second I meet them? Is it because I'm talking about it every single minute and maybe they just want to take a break and talk about something else for a moment? So you really need to analyze and be truthful with yourself. I understand, by the way. I'm not criticizing anybody because, you wake up to this and you want to do something. You just got this immediate urge to do something and talk to everyone. And you may be the type of person that doesn't care what other people think of you initially. I don't believe these people who say that they don't need anybody in life. I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't need anyone. I mean, we all need somebody. We all need something. All right, we're social animals. Civilization exists because people communicate with each other. You may be tougher about it. You may have a thicker skin than others do. But essentially, we all need somebody. So you really need to look into yourself and say, is it really 9/11 truth, or is it something that I'm doing? And I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's probably something you're doing. How you're presenting it. Or it might not be how you're presenting it. It might be just how you react to other people's perceptions or reactions. And this is something I'm learning as I get older, too. Problems can really escalate based off of what you do. You can't control how other people react. You can't control what other people do. You can only control your own reaction to it. And even in cases where other people are wrong, you can still contribute to the problem by how you handle it. And even if other people are wrong, that doesn't mean that you need to destroy them. You don't need to verbally assault them. You don't need to make them feel any worse. I mean, this is a tough issue. Some people know this and they just don't want to deal with it because it's scary to them. And so what do? Do you dismiss them as a jerk, or do you sympathize with them? So are you turning off the world, or is the world turning off you? And if you come to that conclusion that it's something that you're doing, that's actually better news, because you can do something about that. You can change yourself. You can make yourself better. You can change how you approach the world. Now, something that got mentioned in this email, too, is relationships and dating. And I think the person just mentioned relationships, but I'm going to mention dating because that's something people have talked about, too. And with regard to that topic, I'm just going to say, most people who don't turn you off immediately when you mention this are open to this information. At least in my experience. I mean, it's either, they're just completely turned off because they believe the official story and they've been told that you're a nutcase by the TV and they just don't want anything to do with you. But if they're not turned off by that immediately, they're willing to hear about it. But it's important also to show that there's more to you than 9/11. That's not the only thing you do. And I mean, it's tough because it probably does occupy the center of your thoughts. But before you woke up to 9/11, you were a person and there were other things that you were interested in. I guarantee. There's other passions you have. I mean, there's other things you want to do in the future. So it's important to not let those things get lost. There's more to you. And where I've seen issues with, people out dating or relationships, once people get past the dating phase and get settled in and have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, is that significant others may perceive that you don't do anything else besides this, or that you don't care about anything else besides this. And that may or may not be true, but you got to think about how you're presenting it. Now, if you really truly don't care, one of these people says, I don't care what you think, then this should not be a problem for you. All right, just go on doing whatever you're doing. But if you're out dating or if you're in a relationship, you got to factor in the other person. I mean, this is what relationships are about. You got to compromise to a certain extent. I'm not saying compromise your principles or compromise your stance for 9/11 or stop doing your activist work, but you got to show the other person that they are important too and that there's more to you than just this. And something that needs to be remembered by some people too is that just because you're crusading to save the world and expose the truth of 9/11 does not give you a license to be a jerk. Think about that movie Forrest Gump, right? The scene in which Jenny, Forrest's love interest, is slapped by the guy she's dating, the hippie guy who is a Vietnam War protester. And Forrest sees it and runs across the room and beats the guy up. And then the next day the guy shows up and he apologizes for it and he says, it's just that bastard Johnson. Well, no, this guy is just a jerk, all right? And he's using his cause as an excuse to be a jerk. So the problem is with him. It's not the cause. It's not the Vietnam War. It's him. So again, I mean, just because you're taking up this cause doesn't mean you have free reign to just act however you want to other people. And I think most people know this, but every once in a while you encounter somebody who is like this. And as I alluded to before, you got to ask yourself, is it something that you are doing? People have brought up the fact that this issue has divided them from their significant others because the significant other believes the other thing, and they blame 9/11, and I mean, certainly they should, and I've talked about this, about how this issue has created divisions that didn't exist before. But this phenomenon is not exactly new. It's not something that only existed after 9/11 happened, after they blew up the buildings. All right, people have drifted apart throughout time over other things. Somebody finds a new religion and the other person doesn't agree with it. Or somebody gets a new job and they become married to their job instead of being married to the person they're married to. All right? People have drifted apart over other things, and so you just have to look at this as a natural consequence. And I understand it is very hurtful when you break up with someone. You could be with someone for over a decade, and some new piece of data is entered into the equation of your life, and it causes a rift. And that is just what happens. I mean, some things are unavoidable in life, and it's sad when it happens, but you have to accept it and look at it as something that took place. You mourned it, but you moved on. And look at it as if, what if your significant other had died? That's terrible when that happens. You mourn it, but hopefully in time you move on. You date other people. You don't fixate on that. I mean, that's my biggest advice, and this really has nothing to do with 9/11. I mean, if you break up with a significant other, throw away anything that was related to this person, any pictures, and put them away. Don't look at them. Don't look at their Facebook anymore. Delete them on Facebook, and just get away from them. Get away from the situation. Get away from whatever is causing the depression. And I guess this is all this half hour of talking and explanation here kind of boils down to that. You got to deal with the root problem and get it out of your life. And chances are it's not 9/11 truth that's causing it. It's probably something you're doing or something that somebody on the outside world is doing. And 9/11 truth is just the excuse that you're using to blame it on. I mean, I'm a pretty happy person. I've accepted this, and I look at this as a consequence of living in the world, being a human being. This is what life is all about. I mean, Jeremy Sagan talked about last week. Right now, what's happening with the cover-up of the scientific evidence of the controlled demolitions is not unique in history. We've had these kind of cover-ups before. We've had science manipulated by governments to push agendas. So why should I look at myself as any more special than anybody else in history who's had to deal with this? I mean, this is the fight that's been put on your doorstep. This is our generation's abolitionist movement, our generation's Revolutionary War. But look at it as an opportunity. Look at the bright side of things. I mean, you have an opportunity to participate in history. You have an opportunity to be the change that you want to see. Look at it as an exciting thing. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of jerks out there, but so goes life. You got to pick up and move on and not be blaming others. There's a line from Rocky Balboa, to quote another movie. I mean, you can't be blaming other people, and I'll add other things, blaming the world for the problems that exist within you. So, I mean, that's my advice. Deal with the root problem. What is it? You know, is it because you're overweight? And then go on a diet. Get some exercise. Are you dealing with negative people? Get away from them. Ultimately, you have control. And I wanted to read this article, and I'm going to end with it. It's actually an excerpt from a book, not an article. The book is by Paul Joseph Watson. He's a writer for Alex Jones's websites, InfoWars and Prison Planet. And the book is called Order Out of Chaos. And he ends the book talking about solutions and how to deal with the things that he writes about in the previous chapters. He talks about false flag terror, specific examples of it. The following couple of paragraphs I think are very poignant, and I wanted to share them with you. Again, this is Paul Joseph Watson's writing. But I want you to let these words sink in, because I think he captures my argument that I'm trying to make here in an even better way with this passage. It says, "It is important to understand that the only people who have ever significantly influenced the world were small groups totally dedicated to their cause. The biggest factor in enabling a person to make a difference is the simple belief that they can make a difference. It is drilled into us from cradle to grave that we are just ordinary people, to the point where people dare not step outside the comfort zone of being an ordinary person. We are led to believe that we are completely powerless and cannot change a thing. This is demonstratively ridiculous. Just take one day from your life and analyze it. Think of every little decision you made during that day and how that decision affected the next one and the one after. Think how each decision you made affected people around you, which then made them make different decisions, and how their decisions affected the people around them. We change our lives and other people's lives every minute of the day, and we're supposed to be powerless? All we need to do is wake up to the fact that we are influential. The alternative media stopped Pakistan and India from going to nuclear war. Just think about what we can get done in the world if we only applied ourselves. The battle begins at home. Unhappy people cannot even change their own life, so they have no hope of changing the world. Depression is the self-indulgent process that convinces you of your own worthlessness. If you are depressed, then you have to change what's within you before you can apply it to the outside world. A lot of people suffer short-term depression if an event takes place that caused it, and the vast majority overcome it. But if your state of melancholy cannot be explained by any single event, it is likely the result of countless years of this matrix false reality pounding on your soul. Most people are immune because they don't realize they have a soul and go on to live lives of painful insignificance. The fact that we are the only living being throughout history with the ability to hate ourselves is proof that we have a soul. But for those who do realize that something is wrong but can't define it, the only outlet is often depression. So in this sense, depression itself is a manufactured attack to divert those who do begin to wake up. Obtain the desire to improve yourself, and I don't mean by sticking signs up on your wall that say, every day in every way I'm getting better and better. Develop respect for your own ability to grab your life by the scruff of the neck and reject all the outside emotional manipulation. And that is absolutely true, folks. And I'm going to tell you, one of the best ways to deal with depression is stop saying that you're depressed. Don't reinforce that in your mind, okay? Don't rely on that as a crutch. Stop telling people that you have an illness. You don't have an illness. Stop thinking of yourself as a depressed person. If something bad happened to you, all right, you have to put it behind you in whatever way that you can. Get it out of your life. Get away from it. If it's continuing, get away from the situation. All right, it's a bad connection with the outside world, either taking place within yourself or within that outside world. And if it's because of 9/11 truth, if something happened, if a relationship broke up because you woke up to 9/11 and the other person didn't, that person wasn't right for you anyway. If it wasn't this thing, it would have been another thing. And so instead of looking at it as a tragedy, look at it as an opportunity, as a new path opening up for you, as a window opening for you to look out and see an entirely new perspective. You know, you'll meet somebody else. I mean, this is a very common thing that takes place. They talk about the law of attraction, and there's videos that make it seem like some super spiritual, mystical thing. But no, it's just common sense. Look, you know, if somebody really likes karate and they go to karate classes, they're going to be around other people who like karate. All right? And if one of them happens to be of the opposite sex, you'll meet them and hopefully chat it up and hook up, and that'll be your new relationship. And you both like karate. You have that in common. If somebody likes to go to poetry readings and they go to poetry readings, they're going to be around other people that like poetry readings. And same scenarios I just outlined with the karate. All right. Well, the same here applies to 9/11 truth. All right. If you have friends that have left you or rejected you, they're probably friends that you needed to lose anyway. And relationships change, people change throughout history. And you need to be able to roll with the punches in this life. That's just the way it is. So don't look at these burned bridges as tragedies. Look at them as opportunities. And people will come back to you too. Once this becomes more cemented in our society, people come back. I had a friend who didn't want to hear any of this, who was going to study to be an engineer. And this is in the very beginning when I started talking about this. Didn't want to hear any of it. Got kind of condescending to me. Turned me off and didn't talk to me for years. And she ended up coming back, finding me on Facebook and saying I was right. Had seen Blueprint for Truth on her own, having nothing to do with me. And said that I was right. And I was actually a full-fledged engineer. So, just because you have a connection break now doesn't mean that you can't reconnect at another time. All right, don't forget this program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.
As clear as the evidence is for the destruction of Building 7 by explosives, the evidence is even more clear in the case of the Twin Towers. When you look at it with a new pair of glasses and looking at the forensic science-based evidence, does it look like a gravitational collapse to you? What about those floors, those pancakes? This is a pancake collapse. We're looking for some pancakes down at below. But what I'm looking for is 110 floors with this kind of metal decking underneath 4 and 5 inches thick of concrete. An acre in size, each of them. 110 acres of these. How many floors do we find down at the bottom? Not 50? Not 10? Not even one. We don't even find metal decking down there, or concrete. There's hardly any macroscopic chunks of concrete. What happened to the metal decking? What happened to the concrete? And this dust made it almost across to New Jersey, across the river. Thick, billowing, laying a carpet of 4 to 6 inches thick around lower Manhattan, pulverized to 100 micron to 10 mil particles, almost like talcum powder, some of it. It's very, very fine. Where's the grinder that produced this? 90,000 tons of it. In these clouds that expanded 10 times the volume of the buildings themselves in just 30 seconds. Now, the available gravitational potential in the whole building is about 110,000 kilowatt hours. That's basically the weight of the building times its height above the ground, evened out. But the expansion of these clouds has been calculated to require about 10 times that energy in heat, which produces that expansion. So we have a problem here. 700 bone fragments, a half an inch long, found on top of the skyscraper across the street. Think about that one. There were 2,749 victims, but only 300 whole bodies were found. 20,000 pieces of bodies found. 6,000 small enough to fit into a test tube. 1,100 victims completely unaccounted for. In other words, no pieces large enough to gain any DNA from, vaporized. 200 pieces were matched to one single person. Can fire and a gravitational collapse account for this massive pulverization of people? Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are at the apex of the 9/11 Truth movement. Why? Because we have those who have the necessary credibility to raise eyebrows and gain attention. We need to act. The power of truth is greater than the power of the lie. So get informed and begin to let the truth speak through you.